Okay, so what's all of this about? If you've been sitting in church or gone to an organ concert and you're listening to this music, you might have the feeling or the impression sometimes that this music is about something. And if you thought that, you would be right. But the question is, what is it about? And that's really the question that has kind of dogged people that try to perform this music. And the crucial question here is, if you don't know what the music's about, then it's going to affect your performance of it, your interpretation of it. So I want to talk a little bit today about Affektenlehre and how it heavily influenced organ music and the development of organ music, and then hence, because so many composers at that time were organists, how it developed and how it influenced all other music. And as we know, the Affektenlehre has two basic pillars or underpinnings, two foundations, and that's the humanist foundation of the Renaissance and then the Christian foundation that became very evident in the music of the Protestant Reformation. So I want to talk a little bit about what that something might be. And to answer that question, we're going to have to take a little dive into organ music history and talk about Albert Schweitzer. Most of you are familiar with Albert Schweitzer, the famous doctor that spent many years in Africa treating the sick and poor people and so on and so forth. But you may not know that Albert Schweitzer was also an organist and, as a matter of fact, studied with the famous French virtuoso and organ composer Charles-Marie Widor in the early 20th century. And Widor, master of the instrument that he was still thinking that he lacked a certain understanding of the music of J.S. Bach and the Baroque era. And he asked Schweitzer about this. And Schweitzer told him that if you want to understand the music itself, you have to understand the Lutheran hymnotic tradition that Bach grew up in and that he used as a way to inform his music. So in other words, what I'm telling you is the music at all times has a textual reference, a conceptual reference that's outside the music itself. And once Schweitzer told what the key to it was, and I'm going to read a few passages from his study of J.S. Bach. It's a 2-volume study that Schweitzer wrote. He was encouraged to write this by Widor himself. Widor wrote the preface to this history of J.S. Bach. The second volume of the book is a study of these musical figurations and their relationship to texts. So I'm going to read a few passages here from Schweitzer to give you an idea that Schweitzer is really, in a certain sense, the one who revives the tradition of the Affektenlehre, or at least tried to. As we're going to see, most organists are not aware of it, and most organists play that Buxtehude piece, that fugue that I just played, rather differently. So Schweitzer says this: art is the translation of aesthetic associations of ideas. The more complexity and intensely the conscious and unconscious concepts and ideas of the artist communicate themselves to us through his artwork, the deeper is the impression. And here's the key sentence. All art speaks in signs and symbols. So in other words, what Schweitzer's telling you, if you're going to understand the music of the Baroque era, you have to understand it as kind of an encoded music. So in other words, you have to learn the way to decode it and understand what's going on. Now, do you need to understand that in order to listen to that music and appreciate it? No, certainly not. But do you need to understand it in order to interpret that music and perform it well? Well, certainly that's so. And we're going to see what the difference is between an Affektenlehre informed performance, which I attempted to do in my performance of that fugue, and a more modern interpretation would be. So anyway, back to Schweitzer. Quote, expressions like erwachen, awake, auffahren, ascend, auferstehen, arise, steigen, mount, emporschwingen, soar, eilen, hasten, strauchen, stumble, wanken, stagger, zinken, fall or to sink, whenever they occur, furnish the germ idea of the theme. So in other words, the text and the words in the text, the actions in the text, tell you what's going on in the music. And then finally, this is the key point on page 55 of volume 2. The first document are the chorales of the Orgelbüchlein. These, listen carefully folks, these 45 chorales are the dictionary of J.S. Bach's musical language, the key to understanding his music as a whole. Now, the chorales, of course, are simply organ improvisations on Lutheran hymns. But you can delve into the chorales and you'll see certain musical figurations that he uses every time certain concepts or words occur. And then when you listen to his organ music that are not chorales, like preludes and fugues and so on, you can hear these same figures going on. So in other words, the music itself is a kind of coded magical language to make you think of certain concepts, certain doctrines, certain feelings, certain emotions, and certain passions. So how do we interpret music that has no textual reference, like this little fugue from Buxtehude? And so on. What's going on there? Well, let me get my outline handier here. Most organists, when they play this piece of music, are going to refer to the Peters edition, and you'll see the manuscript of this sheet music on your screen. Now, if you look on that first page of the music of the fugue, you'll notice Roman numerals are there, 1, 2, and 3. And what that's telling you in the Peters edition is you play the fugue theme as an echo. In other words, like this. Okay, and I didn't do it that way, okay? And now there's reasons why, but the simple and fundamental reason is most organists have been brought up or trained with the Peters edition of this piece. And those markings that you see in that music are not there in the original manuscript. None of that stuff, none of the ornaments, okay, that little ornament that I put on that upper F, that's a mordant. That's called a mordant. In the Peters edition, most organists are going to play it with a trill, like that, okay? Now, again, the Peters edition is adding all of those little symbols to tell you what ornaments to use. It's not there in the original manuscript. So why am I using a mordant like that instead of a trill? Well, a mordant is a stronger ornament, in my opinion. Okay? And the reason I'm using a strong ornament is because the echo idea, which is also in Peters, is about the farthest thing from a devout Lutheran's mind like Dietrich Buxtehude would have. Because what's the fugue theme? Look at the fugue subject for a moment. It's in the key of F major. Now, in the thinking at that time, F major is, guess what, folks? It's a pastoral key. They used it very often when they were symbolizing pastoral settings, shepherds in the Bible, sheep shepherds tending their flocks in Greece or whatever. If they were using classical literature to set a text to, they'd use the same sort of symbolism, and they would use the key of F major. So right off the bat, Buxtehude is telling us this is a pastoral piece. It's intended for a pastoral setting. Now, if you're wondering why I'm going through all of this, it's because in 1705, J.S. Bach, a young man at the time, 20 years old, had just received his first really good, important posting to be the organist at Arnstadt in Germany. And shortly after he was posted, he was a mere 20 years old at the time, shortly after he was posted in Arnstadt and got that position, he took a couple of weeks leave, vacation leave, and he walked 250 miles from Arnstadt up to Lübeck, Germany, to hear Dietrich Buxtehude, the man that we've been listening to. Because Buxtehude was sort of the Bach of the day. He was the Bach before Bach. He was famous, he was well known, and he was also well known as an organ virtuoso in addition to a composer. Buxtehude is telling you right off the bat that this is in F major, and I'm going through all this because this has a huge influence on J.S. Bach when he realized the extent to which you could actually encode symbolism in music. Well, Buxtehude would hardly do this echo thing. Why? Because he's a Lutheran. This fugue thing, this fugue subject has 3 sections to it. And let me play them for you again. Get rid of this sheet music here. Let me play that fugue subject for you again. That's the fugue subject. And you notice there's 3 parts to it. There's the opening, which is what I call the announcement. First time, second time, third time. Why 3? Well, Lutherans believe in the Trinity. So in other words, this is a Trinitarian announcement. It's like the musical version of saying, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Then you get the little skipping motif. Okay? Now, why the skipping motif? Well, again, if you read Schweitzer and delve into the organ chorales of J.S. Bach, those skipping motifs usually are meant to symbolize joy. Whether or not you're in the minor keys or in the major keys, usually they're meant to symbolize joy. So in other words, we're following up an announcement with a little joy. Okay? Then you have that little running passage. And more skipping. Now, if you listen to the running passage, what are you hearing? Well, you're hearing essentially this. Okay, it's dolled up a little bit, like that. But essentially, you're listening to a falling scale. Now, here's where it gets very interesting. If you don't think these people are thinking in this detailed of a fashion, think again. Scale in Latin is scalum. Scalum is a Latin term that can mean a scale, like a musical scale, or it can mean a scale like a ladder that you go up and down on. And again, the biblical reference here would be very, very clear to a 17th and 18th century Lutheran. Jacob's ladder is usually understood in Lutheran theology, being heavily influenced by the church fathers that it was, as a sign of the incarnation. And scales often work this way in this organ music of the time. They either symbolize ascension to heaven or descension from heaven. So So in other words, Buxtehude is doing something very profound here in a musical code. He's giving you a Trinitarian announcement. He's giving you a little symbolism of joy and then a falling scale. And that, I think, in this context with the pastoral key of F major, represents precisely the coming down of Christ from heaven to earth. So in other words, this is a Christmas piece you're listening to. Now, we can go even further into this decoding, because if you listen to that third section of the fugue theme, what you're hearing are musical crosses, because it begins, play it real slow, so it begins on E, moves up to F, goes down to D, and comes back to E. So if you connect the two E's, you get one bar, and if you connect the F and the D, you get another bar. And there's, guess what? There's 4 of them. They all take E or D or C or B flat as their dissension in the scale. So in other words, you've got 4 musical crosses on top of this. So you've got a Trinitarian announcement, leaping for joy, descending from heaven, 4 musical crosses, and then you end up again with skipping motifs. Okay? So in other words, this is all code that you're listening to. So even when there's no text in the music, or no, like in an organ chorale, a setting of a hymn where the organist or the composer is improvising on a text being set to music, even in the absence of a text, you're dealing with concepts that the music is conveying. So in other words, this is not so much a pictorial language, but it's a rhetorical language. You're using certain musical gestures to communicate certain concepts. Now, do you need to do it in a Christian context? Absolutely not. Think of dum, bum, 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 ba-dum. We all think of Darth Vader ever since that theme was pounded into our heads by John Williams in the music. And every time he appears on the screen, that theme is heard, so eventually you associate the two. So this is what's going on in this music. You hear these types of figures over and over again, and you gradually begin to associate them with certain concepts. Now, you can go further. At the very end of this fugue, you'll recall that we were bopping along pretty well with our fugue subject. Let's start here. And then we get scales. Notice I took vast liberties, pardon the mistakes, but I took vast liberties with the very end of that fugue. Buxtehude's pieces often end with these big dramatic virtuosic flourishes. And I altered it and played with the time a little bit and basically threw away the bar lines because there's something else going on. We've got ascending scales, and then we've got 2 descending scales. Why? Now, I've given you enough to suggest for you to work things out on your own. But again, I'm arguing that there are strong symbolisms in this piece, which if you miss them, you're going to be led to misinterpret the piece and think of the opening thing as an echo. It's not an echo, it's an announcement. And if you play it as an announcement, you gradually build the volume, build the intensity, and so on and so forth. And there's a final reason it can't be an echo, because when it starts in the pedals, you've got 3 announcements, but you have no way to echo them in the pedals. So in other words, your interpretation breaks down, if you're playing it the way most organists do, at the precise moment the theme enters the pedals. You can't do it anymore, okay? So in other words, I'm arguing that the whole intention and meaning of the piece changes if you're not aware of how these composers encoded things into their music. Once you are aware of that, it's going to require you to make certain points or registrations, or the way it sounds, or the tempo that you're playing the piece at. All of this is taken into consideration depending on how you're interpreting the coding going on. So we end with those scales, and you'll notice I kind of threw out Buxtehude's ending right at the very end. The way Buxtehude has that final passage going is written in the manuscript this way. That's the way the manuscript reads. You'll notice what I did is I played the theme announcement one more time, just as a final reminder that that's what the whole piece was about. So organists do that all the time. We ad lib a bit, and it was expected at the time that you would ad lib in a piece of music, adding ornaments and so on and so forth. So it's pretty conventional to do that sort of stuff. I may have ad libbed a little bit too much there for the purists, but to me it's just a missed opportunity that he had there to drill the fugue subject home one more time and leave it ringing in people's ears. So anyway, that's what was going on. So let's go back and remember those pieces that I played at the very opening of the piece, and of the talk, and let you decide what's going on. What's going on with that first Buxtehude piece? What's going on with that? Well, we have more leaping. What's going on with the Magnificat? That piece, again, is all scales. And why a Magnificat? Why do you have a minor key for a Magnificat to celebrate the Virgin Mary? You know, my soul doth magnify the Lord, and so on and so forth. Why is he putting that piece in D minor? Well, number one, again, in the doctrine of the 18th century, the key of D minor was a feminine key. Why the scale? Why all of those leaps and so on going on in that piece? So again, he's coding the music to the concept and to the text, in this case, of the Magnificat itself. But in other music, we don't have a textual reference, but we still have all of those rhetorical figures. So Affektenlehre is very important, folks, and like it or not, the 18th century is full of it. You'll hear it in Mozart, you'll hear it in Haydn, you'll even get a little bit in Beethoven on occasion, but it affects the music of that era very, very deeply and carries forward in some unsuspected ways today. So I hope you enjoyed a little talk about Affektenlehre.